Hello, dear viewers. The following stories are inspired by real events, but the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story 1. The Shadow on the Way Home. In 2024, on a chilly autumn night in Austin, Texas, Emily Carter, name changed, had just finished her late shift at a downtown coffee shop. It was almost 1 a.m. The streets were deserted and quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Emily tiredly walked out of the shop, put on a thin coat, and started walking home. She lived in a small apartment complex about a 15-minute walk away, and she often took a shortcut through a quiet neighborhood to save time. The shortcut Emily often took was quite dark, with only the faint light from the sparse street lamps. On both sides of the road were old houses with tall, dense hedges, creating a somewhat scary space at night. Normally, Emily would not feel scared when walking down this road, but tonight, a strange sense of unease surrounded her. She felt as if someone was watching her, even though there was no one around. When Emily reached the most deserted stretch of road, near an abandoned house covered with vines, she suddenly saw a strange figure standing under the streetlight. It was the image of a young girl, about Emily's age, wearing a long white dress, her black hair falling down to cover her face. The terrifying thing was that the figure seemed to be floating in the air, not touching the ground, and emitting a pale, cold light. Emily stood still, her heart pounding in her chest, an extreme fear spreading throughout her body. The girl's figure slowly turned to face Emily. Even though her face was hidden by her hair, Emily could still feel a painful and resentful gaze staring at her. Suddenly, the figure let out a choked cry, a mournful and desperate sound, which made Emily's skin crawl. She couldn't move, her whole body stiff with fear. She could only stand there staring at the terrifying figure hovering in front of her. After a moment that seemed to last forever, the girl's figure began to fade into the air, leaving a terrifying silence covering the street. Only then did Emily come to her senses. She quickly turned around and ran away. Her heart still pounding, she ran all the way back to her apartment, slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. That whole night, Emily couldn't sleep. The image of the girl's ghost and the mournful cry haunted her mind. A few nights later, Emily had to come home late from work again. This time, she deliberately chose a different route, even though it was a bit further, to avoid that terrifying stretch of road. However, when she reached a deserted intersection, she saw the girl's figure again, still standing under the streetlight, still wearing a white dress and black hair covering her face. This time, the figure not only stood still but also slowly walked towards Emily, emitting terrifying moans. Emily was horrified to realize that this ghost seemed to be trying to communicate with her. But the shape and sound it made were too scary. She felt a strange urge to find out who this ghostly girl was and why she appeared on this road at night. In the following days, Emily began to ask the people living in the neighborhood about strange events or tragic accidents that had happened on that road. Through the stories she heard, Emily learned that not long ago, around the end of 2023, there was a traffic accident on the road where she often saw the ghost. A young girl named Sarah Johnson, name changed, was hit by a truck while walking home late at night, and she died on the spot. The locals said that Sarah was a gentle and kind girl, but her life ended tragically. Emily suddenly realized that the ghost she saw was most likely Sarah's spirit, still lingering at the place where she had lost her life. In the following days, every time she got home from work late at night, Emily had to face a heart-wrenching internal battle. Taking the familiar shortcut would be faster. But the terrifying image of Sarah Johnson and her mournful cries haunted Emily's mind. Taking the detour was safer. But it took more time and made her feel uneasy with curiosity. "I can't keep running away like this," Emily told herself, her voice whispering in the darkness of her small apartment. "I need to know what happened to her." One afternoon, during her lunch break at a coffee shop, Emily told her best friend, Jessica, an odd coincidence in name, about the ghostly encounters she had had on her way home. Jessica was initially skeptical, thinking that Emily was just too stressed and imagining things. "Emily, maybe you just need a break. Working the night shift is tiring," Jessica said, looking worried. But as Emily described the ghost in detail and the terrifying sounds it made, Jessica began to feel a chill run down her spine. "It sounds scary. Do you think it's the spirit of that girl named Sarah you heard about?" Determined to find out the truth, Emily went to the local library one afternoon after work. She searched through old newspapers and archives about a traffic accident that had occurred in late 2023 on a road she often traveled. Emily anxiously flipped through the yellowed pages, hoping to find any information related to Sarah Johnson. "I need to know what happened to her," Emily muttered, her eyes focused on the faded text. Eventually, Emily found a few short articles about the accident. According to the reports, 22-year-old Sarah Johnson was hit by a delivery truck while walking home around 1 a.m. The accident happened on a dark, deserted stretch of road, with no witnesses. The truck driver claimed he didn't see Sarah until it was too late. The reports didn't provide many other details. But Emily felt a sense of sadness as she imagined the young woman's sudden and lonely death. One weekend, Emily decided to return to the road where she had seen Sarah's ghost. This time it was daytime, the sunlight shining everywhere, dispelling the creepy feeling of the road. Emily stood on the deserted road near the abandoned house where the accident had occurred. She tried to imagine what had happened that fateful night, feeling the coldness and loneliness that Sarah must have experienced in her final moments. A feeling of pity welled up in Emily's heart. As Emily stood pensively on the side of the road, an elderly woman walking her dog stopped and looked at her curiously. "Are you one of the new residents in this area?" she asked in a friendly voice. Emily nodded and took the opportunity to ask her about Sarah Johnson's accident. The old woman sighed, saying that she had lived here for many years and still remembered the tragic accident clearly. "Little Sarah was a kind and loving person," the old woman said, her voice breaking. "What a pity for such a young girl." She also said that after the accident, many people in the neighborhood reported feeling a creepy presence on the road at night. A few nights later, Emily had to work late again and was forced to take the familiar shortcut. As she approached the scary stretch of road, she saw Sarah Johnson's figure again. But this time, the ghost was no longer standing still, but was slowly walking along the road, heading toward the abandoned house. Sarah's eyes, though still sad, seemed less resentful than before. Emily felt a strange change in the ghost's demeanor, as if Sarah was trying to lead her somewhere. As Emily approached the abandoned house, she suddenly saw something glistening under the streetlights, right on the sidewalk where Sarah had met her accident. She bent down to pick it up and realized it was a small silver necklace. The pendant was a small angel. Emily remembered that in an article she had read, Sarah Johnson had always worn this necklace. A sudden thought flashed through Emily's mind. Perhaps Sarah's accident was not as simple as what had been reported. And this necklace could be an important clue. Emily held the small silver necklace in her palm. The small angel sparkled faintly under the lights of the motel room, a symbol of protection and hope. But now it evoked in Emily a vague sadness and a deep doubt. Why had such an important necklace fallen off Sarah at the scene of the accident? Had it been snatched back in some kind of struggle? Emily felt a strong urge to find out the answer. "I can't let this go," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the necklace. Emily decided to look up the police report on Sarah Johnson's accident. She believed it might contain more important details than what had been reported in the papers. She searched the Austin Police Department's website, but couldn't find any details about this particular accident. "I guess I'll have to go in person," Emily thought, a little nervous at the thought of having to deal with law enforcement. The next morning, after work, Emily went to the local police station. She timidly approached the information desk and presented her request. "Hello, my name is Emily Carter. I'm looking for information about a traffic accident that happened late last year on Oak Street. The victim was Sarah Johnson." The police officer on duty looked at her suspiciously. "Are you related to the victim? Information about accidents that are under investigation is usually not made public to outsiders." Emily tried to explain. "I'm just a resident of that area and I feel like something is wrong with this accident. I just want to find out more." After some persuasion, the police officer reluctantly gave Emily the case file number and directed her to the records department. At the records department, Emily was shown a detailed report about Sarah Johnson's accident. She read each line carefully, trying to find any anomalies. According to the report, Sarah was walking home late at night and was hit from behind by a delivery truck. The truck driver claimed that he did not see Sarah because it was dark and the road was deserted. There were no other witnesses. However, Emily noticed a strange detail. The report did not mention the finding of the silver necklace, which she had picked up at the scene. Why was such an important item not recorded? Emily wondered, her suspicions growing. Emily decided to try to find information about the truck driver related to the accident. She wrote down the driver's name from the report and tried searching on social media and information websites. After a while of searching, she also found some information about this person, named Michael Thompson. He was a long-haul truck driver and did not appear to have a criminal record. Emily hesitated, wondering whether to contact him. Does he know something the police missed? Emily thought. In the end, Emily decided to send a polite email to Michael Thompson, introducing herself and saying that she was looking into Sarah Johnson's accident. She didn't expect Michael to respond so quickly. He seemed quite upset about the accident and agreed to meet Emily to share what he remembered. When they met, Michael said that it was a very dark and foggy night. He said that he was shocked to find out that he had hit a pedestrian. However, he also remembered that right after the accident, he saw a black car speeding away from the scene. "I'm not sure, but I think that car might have been parked nearby before the accident," Michael said uncertainly. This detail made Emily feel extremely surprised and suspicious. Emily continued to search for information about Sarah Johnson. She reached out to Sarah's old classmates on social media and sent messages asking about her. A few responded, remembering Sarah as a kind, outgoing, and optimistic girl. A close friend of Sarah's said that Sarah had been a little nervous lately and often said that she felt like someone was watching her. Sarah also said that she was afraid to walk home alone at night. The friend shared, making Emily feel a sense of unease rising inside her. While chatting with a friend of Sarah's, Emily suddenly received shocking information. This friend said that a few weeks before the accident, Sarah told her that she saw a suspicious black car following her on her way home. Sarah also took a photo of the license plate and said that she would call the police if this happened again. Emily quickly asked her friend if she still had the license plate number. Sarah's friend searched through her old phone and finally found a photo of the license plate number. When Emily saw the series of numbers and letters on the license plate, she realized that it was the black car that Michael Thompson had seen speeding away from the scene of the accident. A horrifying truth in Emily's mind. Perhaps Sarah Johnson's death was not an accident, but a sophisticatedly staged murder. Emily sat quietly in the small rented room, her eyes never leaving the photo of the license plate number of the black car. A cold and terrifying truth dawned on her. Sarah Johnson had not died in an accident. She had been murdered. The sadness and sympathy for Sarah was overwhelming. But at the same time, a fire of determination to find the culprit burned in Emily's heart. "I have to do something," she whispered, clutching the angel necklace in her hand as if she were looking for courage and guidance. The very next morning, Emily went to the police station again. She met with the police officer who had taken her case the last time, and presented the new information she had gathered. The truck driver's statement about the black car leaving the scene, and the photo of the license plate that Sarah's friend had provided. Emily told the whole story in detail and clearly, her voice filled with urgency and conviction. "I believe this is no ordinary accident. Sarah was murdered, and this car may be the most important clue," Emily said firmly. The police officer, after listening to Emily's explanation, seemed surprised and somewhat skeptical. "Miss Carter, we have investigated this accident very carefully, and have not found any signs of intentional damage. The truck driver's statement has also been verified." However, when Emily showed her a photo of the license plate, and mentioned that Sarah had reported a suspicious car following her, the police officer began to look more seriously. "This is new information. We will check it out," he said, carefully taking notes of what Emily had provided. While waiting for a response from the police, Emily continued to research information on her own. She went back to the neighborhood where Sarah had lived and asked the neighbors. She tried to find out if Sarah had any complicated relationships or enemies. Some neighbors remembered that Sarah was a good and gentle girl, who did not have any enemies. However, an old lady who lived across the street from Sarah's house remembered that a few weeks before the accident, she saw a black car parked near Sarah's house at night, and a strange man had been waiting there for a long time. A few days later, the police contacted Emily. They informed her that they had identified the owner of the black car. It was a man named David Miller, name changed, and he was Sarah Johnson's ex-boyfriend. According to the records, Sarah and David had broken up not long ago, and their relationship was not very good at the end. The police said they were questioning David Miller to clarify the suspicions. Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She waited for news from the police with unspeakable excitement. Finally, after a few tense days, the police called Emily and informed her that David Miller had confessed to his actions. He said that after the breakup, he was still in love with Sarah and could not accept her having a new lover. On the night of the accident, he followed Sarah on her way home and deliberately drove into her. He tried to disguise the scene as a normal traffic accident. When she heard that David Miller had confessed to the crime, Emily felt a mixture of relief and anger. Justice had finally been served for Sarah. Emily returned to the road where she had first encountered Sarah's ghost. Tonight, the road was still deserted and quiet, but there was no longer a sense of fear. Emily stood at the exact spot where Sarah had lost her life, looking up at the starry night sky and whispering, "Sarah, the truth has finally been revealed. You can rest in peace now." In that moment, Emily felt a gentle breeze blowing by, carrying with it a strange sense of peace and serenity. The terrifying figure of Sarah Johnson was no longer present. Emily knew that Sarah's spirit had finally found peace after the truth about her death was revealed. Emily turned and walked away, no longer feeling afraid to walk down this road at night. She knew that she had done the right thing. And although the horrific experience would forever be a part of her memory, she had also learned an important lesson about perseverance, compassion, and the power of truth. The ghost on the deserted street has disappeared, but the story of Emily's courage and Sarah Johnson's injustice will be told forever. Story 2. Ghost in the Dark Alley. In 2024, on a cold winter night in Seattle, Washington, Lynn, name changed, had just finished work at a restaurant in the downtown area. The clock hands pointed past midnight. The street was wet and cold. Only the sound of the wind whistling and Lynn's lonely footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Lynn lived in an apartment building not far away, and she often chose to take a shortcut through a small alley to get home faster. Even though this alley was quite dark and had few people passing by late at night, the alley that Lynn often passed through was located between two tall buildings. The light from the street lamps outside barely penetrated. The damp brick walls covered with moss. The trash cans scattered about, giving off an unpleasant smell, created a gloomy and scary scene. Normally, Lynn tried to walk quickly through this alley without paying attention to her surroundings. But tonight, a strange feeling of unease followed her, making her shiver. She felt like someone was watching her from the darkness, even though there was not a single person in sight. When Lynn reached the middle of the alley, where the darkness was thickest, she suddenly saw a strange figure appear under the street light shining in from the alley entrance. It was the image of a woman, tall and thin, wearing a loose black cloak, covering her head. The scary thing was that the figure seemed to be floating in the air, not touching the ground, and her face was completely hidden in the darkness of the hood. Lynn stood still, her heart pounding, a cold fear spreading throughout her body, making her limbs numb. The woman's figure slowly turned her head towards Lynn, even though she couldn't see her face clearly. Lynn could still feel the resentment and extreme pain from that figure. Suddenly, that figure let out a terrifying screech, a shrill and hateful sound, as if tearing through the silent night. Lynn screamed in horror, trying to retreat, but her legs seemed to be frozen in place. She could only stare at the terrifying figure slowly approaching her, feeling as if she was suffocating from fear. After a moment that seemed to last forever, the woman's figure suddenly disappeared, melting into the darkness as if it had never existed. Only then did Lynn come to her senses. She hastily turned around and ran away, tears streaming down her face. She ran straight out of the alley, rushed towards her apartment building, slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. That whole night, Lynn could not sleep. The image of the scary ghost and the terrifying screeching sound haunted her mind, making her not dare to close her eyes. A few nights later, Lynn had to work late again. This time, she was determined to avoid the scary alley and took a detour, even though it was longer and more time-consuming. However, when she reached a deserted stretch of road near the park, she saw the figure of the woman again, still wearing a black cloak covering her head, standing under an old tree. This time, The figure not only stood still but also slowly raised its hand towards Lynn. Its long, thin fingers like claws, beckoning her. Lynn was horrified to realize that this ghost seemed to be trying to attract her attention. But its terrifying shape and sudden appearance made Lynn want to run away as fast as possible. She felt a strange urge to know why this ghost appeared and what it wanted from her. In the following days, Lynn began asking her colleagues and people living near that area about strange events or tragic accidents that had happened in the alley she often passed by. Through the stories she heard, Lynn learned that about a year ago, in the winter of 2023, there was a murder case in the alley where she often saw ghosts. A young girl named Anna, name changed, was brutally murdered there. It was rumored that Anna was a beautiful and kind girl, but she became the victim of a perverted murderer. The case shocked the whole neighborhood, but to this day the murderer has not been found. Lynn suddenly realized that the ghost she saw was most likely Anna's soul, still lingering in the place where she tragically lost her life. In the following nights, every time her shift ended, Lynn stood at a crossroads full of hesitation. The alley was still the shortest way home, but the image of Anna's tall, thin ghost and her cold shriek echoed in Lynn's mind, making her afraid to step in. "I can't keep avoiding it like this," Lynn told herself, tightening the strap of her handbag in her hand. "Anna died unjustly there. I need to know what really happened." One afternoon, while cleaning the table at the restaurant, Lynn told Mai, an older and friendly colleague, about her encounters with the ghost in the alley. Mai was initially worried, advising Lynn to be careful and perhaps she was just too tired. "Lynn, it's late at night and deserted. Sometimes I tend to think too much. You should get enough sleep during the day," Mai said in a gentle voice. But when Lynn described in detail the ghost's scary appearance and scary sound, Mai suddenly shivered. "Hearing you tell me that makes me shiver. Did something bad happen in that alley before?" Lynn decided to search for information about Anna's murder on the internet. When she got home, she turned on her computer and typed in keywords related to the murder that happened in the winter of 2023 near the restaurant where she worked. A series of articles appeared, but most of them only briefly reported that a young girl was murdered in the alley. The perpetrator still not found. "There must be more information than this," Lynn muttered, patiently reading each article, trying to piece together the pieces of the story. Finally, Lynn found some more detailed articles about the brutal murder of Anna, a 20-year-old college student. According to these articles, Anna was attacked and stabbed multiple times while walking home after a late-night tutoring session. The police found her body the next morning in the alley. The case caused great outrage in the community. But despite the police's intensive investigation, the perpetrator remained at large. The details of the case made Lynn shiver and feel sorry for Anna's fate. On a free afternoon, Lynn returned to the alley where she often saw Anna's ghost. This time it was daytime. The alley looked completely different. No longer as scary as at night. The weak light filtered through the gap between two buildings, illuminating the puddles and dried blood stains on the brick floor. Lynn tried to imagine the horrible scene that happened here a year ago, feeling the pain and fear that Anna must have experienced in her final moments. A feeling of resentment welled up in Lynn's heart. As Lynn stood pensively in the middle of the alley, an old man living in a nearby apartment stepped out and looked at her curiously. "Is she the new girl who moved here?" he asked hoarsely. Lynn nodded and took the opportunity to ask him about Anna's murder. The old man sighed, saying that he still remembered that night clearly. Anna was such a gentle girl, Who would have thought something like that would happen? He said, his voice sad. After that incident, every night I heard the sound of crying echoing in this alley. The old man's story made Lynn feel creepy, and she believed that the ghost she saw was the echo of Anna's pain. A few nights later, Lynn had to work late again and had no choice but to walk through that dark alley. As she approached the middle of the alley, a cold wind suddenly blew through, carrying a faint scent of jasmine. Lynn suddenly remembered that Mai had once told her that Anna loved jasmine. Suddenly, Anna's tall and thin ghost appeared again, this time standing right in front of Lynn, her face still hidden, but Lynn felt a deep sadness from that figure. Anna slowly raised her hand, her finger pointing towards the end of the alley, where there was an old brick wall. Lynn trembled as she followed the direction the ghost pointed. As she approached the brick wall, she suddenly saw a scribbled line written in red paint, faded over time. The line read, "He, the red scarf." A cold feeling ran down Lynn's spine. The red scarf? Is this a clue that Anna's spirit is trying to convey to her? A suspicion in Lynn's mind. Perhaps Anna's killer is still hiding somewhere in this neighborhood, and her spirit is looking for help to expose him. Lynn returned to her small apartment, her mind still reeling from the mysterious words on the damp brick wall. He, the red scarf. She repeated these words over and over in her head, trying to figure out their true meaning. Why the red scarf? What does it have to do with the murderer who killed Anna? Lynn felt that this was the only red thread that could lead her to the truth. She sat down at the table, took out her phone and started searching for information about Anna's murder again. Lynn opened the articles and photos she had found earlier about Anna's case. She carefully examined each photo, trying to find any details related to the red scarf. However, in the published photos, Anna was not wearing a scarf. Lynn felt a little disappointed, but she did not give up. Maybe that scarf was not mentioned in the report. She thought, I need to look for other sources of information. The next morning, when she went to work at the restaurant, Lynn found an opportunity to talk to Ms. Mai. She told her about the writing she had seen in the alley. Ms. Mai, do you remember the girl named Anna who was murdered in the alley recently? I saw a strange writing there. It mentioned a red scarf. Do you remember if Anna often wore a red scarf? Ms. Mai frowned, trying to remember. Anna? I vaguely remember that girl often wore a dark coat in the winter. The scarf? I don't seem to remember very clearly. Let me think. After a few minutes of silence, Mai shook her head. I'm not sure, Lynn, but you should ask the people who work the morning shift. Maybe they'll pay more attention. Lynn asked her colleagues who worked the morning shift, but no one remembered whether Anna often wore a red scarf or not. She felt a little discouraged, but she still decided to try to find information from the people who lived near the alley. After work, Lynn returned to that area and started knocking on doors, asking about Anna and the red scarf. Most people didn't remember, but when Lynn asked an old lady who lived right at the beginning of the alley, the old lady stopped and looked at her suspiciously. A red scarf? I think I saw someone wearing a scarf like that, hanging around here on that terrible night. Lynn's heart beat faster. Can you remember more clearly? Who was that person? The old woman frowned, trying to recall from her hazy memory. It was very dark. I couldn't see his face clearly. I just remember a tall figure, wearing a black coat. The red scarf stood out very much. The old woman paused for a moment and then added, I also remember that person seemed to be arguing with someone in the alley before everything happened. But I didn't dare to go near him because I was afraid. The old woman's story made Lin feel a terrible unease. Lin continued to ask other people in the neighborhood, and finally she found an old classmate of Anna's. This friend remembered Anna very well and confirmed that Anna did not have a red scarf. Anna likes blue and purple more. She often wears a light blue scarf in the winter, the friend said. This information made Lin feel confused. So whose red scarf was Anna's ghost referring to? A few nights later, when Lin had to work late again and passed through the alley, she saw Anna's ghost again. This time, the ghost was no longer standing still but was moving hurriedly, as if trying to attract Lin's attention. Anna kept pointing to the end of the alley, where there was a large trash can placed near the brick wall. Lin felt a strong urge to go and check out that trash can. As she approached, an unpleasant stench rushed into her nose, making her feel nauseous. Lin carefully opened the lid of the trash can. Inside, mixed with the dirty trash, she suddenly saw something bright red. She shakily reached out to take it out and realized it was a red scarf. Made of thick wool, the scarf also had a strong scent of perfume, a scent that Lin had never smelled before. A horrifying thought crossed Lin's mind. Perhaps this scarf belonged to the murderer who killed Anna, and her spirit was trying to lead Lin to this important evidence. Lin felt a terrifying danger lurking around, but she knew that she had gone too far to stop. She needed to find the owner of this red scarf, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Lin carefully held up the red scarf under the dim street light. The thick wool material, the bright red color stood out in the dark night, but it gave Lin a cold and uneasy feeling. She carefully observed each strand of wool, trying to find any special signs that could help her identify its owner. A strong scent of perfume still lingered on the scarf, a strange scent that Lin had never smelled before. This is the key, Lin told herself, squeezing the scarf tightly in her hand, a determination mixed with a little fear welling up in her heart. The next morning, when she arrived at the restaurant, Lin brought the red scarf to show to Ms. Mai. Ms. Mai, do you recognize this scarf? I found it near the alley where Anna was murdered that night. Ms. Mai picked up the scarf, examining it carefully. This scarf, I don't think I've ever seen Anna wear it before. And this red color doesn't look like her style. Let me ask some other people. Mai asked her other colleagues, but no one recognized the scarf. Lin felt a little disappointed, but she still didn't give up hope. After work, Lin took the scarf to the neighborhood near the alley and knocked on every door. Asking the residents, she described the scarf in detail, hoping that someone would recognize it. Most people shook their heads, saying that they had never seen this scarf before. Lin felt a little discouraged, but she kept going, not wanting to miss any opportunity. Lin decided to find the phone number of Anna's best friend, whom she had contacted earlier. She called and told this friend about the red scarf she had found. Lan, I found a red scarf near the alley where Anna died. Do you know who this scarf belongs to? Did Anna often mention someone with a red scarf? Lan was silent for a moment before answering. No, I've never heard Anna mention a red scarf. And it seems like Anna doesn't like the color red very much. When Lin was almost losing hope, she suddenly remembered a small detail that the old lady living at the beginning of the alley had told her. The suspicious man she saw that night was wearing a black coat and a striking red scarf. Lin hurried back to find the old lady. Grandma, can you describe the man wearing the red scarf that night in more detail? Do you remember his face or any other features? The old lady frowned as she tried to remember. I couldn't see his face clearly because it was dark, but he was tall and a bit thin. I think I've seen him around this area before." Suddenly, the old woman exclaimed, "Ah, I remember. He often comes to the corner grocery store to buy things. I've seen him a few times." Lynn's heart was pounding. She hurried to the corner grocery store and asked the store owner if he remembered a tall, thin man who often wore a black coat and a red scarf. The store owner thought for a moment and then nodded. "Ah, I remember him. He often bought cigarettes here. I think his name was Min." The store owner also told Lynn that Min lived in a nearby boarding house. Lynn felt a terrible danger approaching, but she knew she had found an important clue. Lynn went to the boarding house that the grocery store owner had pointed out. She carefully asked the people there about Min. Finally, she found his room. The door was ajar. Lynn gently pushed the door open and entered. The room was dark and messy. The familiar strong smell of perfume rushed into her nose. On the old table, Lynn saw a black coat and a bright red scarf, exactly like the one she had found in the trash. At that moment, a tall figure appeared from behind the bathroom door. It was Min. His face turned pale when he saw Lynn and the scarf in her hand. Who are you? What are you doing here?" Min stuttered, his eyes filled with fear and hatred. Lynn tried to stay calm. "I'm Anna's friend. I know you're the one who killed her." Min glared at Lynn. A sinister smile appeared on his face. "What do you know? You have no evidence." Suddenly, the window behind Min opened. A cold wind blew in, and Anna's tall and thin ghost appeared, standing right behind Min, her eyes filled with resentment. Min turned around in horror, saw Anna's ghost, screamed, and fell to his knees. At that moment, the police stormed into the room. They had been following Lynn from afar after she reported the new clue. Min was arrested on the spot. Anna's case was finally solved. That night, when Lynn walked through the familiar alley, she could no longer see Anna's ghost. She felt a sense of peace from the darkness, as if Anna's soul had finally been released. Lynn knew that she had done the right thing, and although the horrifying memories would remain, she had brought justice to a wronged soul. The third story, The Shadow on the Old Street. In 2023, on a chilly October night in Salem, Massachusetts, a place famous for its history of witchcraft and ghost stories, my name changed, had just finished her late shift at a souvenir shop located in the center of town. It was almost 11 p.m. The ancient cobblestone streets were deserted and quiet. Only the sound of the wind blowing gently through the bare trees and Mai's lonely footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Mai lived in a residential area not far away, and she often chose to walk home to enjoy the peaceful atmosphere of the town at night. Even though the streets were sometimes a bit deserted, the street that Mai often walks through is called Hawthorne Boulevard, famous for its ancient houses built in the 18th century. During the day, this place attracts many tourists to visit. But when night falls, the tall houses with rows of dense old trees on both sides of the road have a gloomy and scary look. The yellow light from the classic street lamps adds to the mysteriousness of the street. Normally, Mai feels quite comfortable walking alone at night, but recently, a strange feeling of insecurity has been following her, especially when she walks through the road near the ancient cemetery. Tonight is the same. When Mai walks to the most deserted road, near the ancient cemetery with mossy tombstones hidden behind tall trees, she suddenly sees a strange figure standing under the street lamp in front. It was the image of a woman, tall and thin, wearing a long, worn white dress, her long black hair falling down, covering most of her face. The scary thing was that the figure didn't seem to move. standing still like a statue, and emitting a pale, cold light, which made Mai shiver. Mai stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. A cold fear spread throughout her body, making her feel as if an invisible hand was squeezing her heart. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that maybe she was just too tired and imagining things. It's probably just a tree or a mannequin someone left behind, Mai muttered, trying to convince herself. But the pale light from the figure and the eerie silence around her made it impossible for her to believe her own words of reassurance. After a few tense seconds, Mai decided to continue walking, trying not to look at the strange figure. She walked faster, her eyes looking straight ahead, but the feeling of someone watching her did not disappear. As she passed the woman's figure, she suddenly heard a soft sigh. A mournful and desperate sound, as if coming from another world. Mai startled and turned her head to look, but the woman's figure was still standing still. In the following days, Mai began to hear whispers from her colleagues and acquaintances in town about strange phenomena happening on Hawthorne Boulevard at night. Some people said that they had also seen a woman dressed in white appearing near the old cemetery, and sometimes heard crying or moaning. At first, Mai thought it was just baseless rumors. But after what she had experienced, she began to believe that maybe something really unusual was happening. One evening, Mai talked to Nam, a colleague who worked the late shift with her. Nam said that about a week ago, when he came home late from work, he had also seen a similar figure on Hawthorne Boulevard. It was around 11 p.m. The street was deserted. I saw a woman dressed in white standing under the streetlight, looking very scary. I quickly walked past, not daring to look back, Nam said, his face still slightly frightened. I heard that many people have encountered this. It must be a ghost or something. Mai felt a real fear rising in her heart. She no longer thought that what she saw was just an illusion. It was clear that there was a terrifying presence haunting Hawthorne Boulevard at night, and many people had fallen victim to it. Mai began to feel anxious every time she had to go home from work late at night alone. She didn't know what she would face next on that scary road, but she knew for sure that she didn't want to see that woman in white again. After hearing what Nam and others had said, Mai's fear had become a real obsession. Every time her shift ended, she felt extreme anxiety when thinking about the way home. Walking through Hawthorne Street at night was no longer a relaxing act but a stressful mental challenge. I can't live in fear like this forever, Mai told herself, trying to find another solution for traveling at night. She thought about taking the bus or calling a taxi, but these options were expensive and less convenient than walking. Determined to find out the origins of the ghosts and strange stories on Hawthorne Street, Mai spent her free time scouring the internet. She typed in keywords related to the history of Salem and Hawthorne Street, hoping to find anything that could explain the terrifying appearance of the woman in white. She read article after website, but most of them focused on the history of the famous Salem witch trials, with no mention of modern ghost stories. Undaunted, Mai decided to visit the local library, where she hoped to find old books or archives that could provide more details about the history of Hawthorne Street. She spent the afternoon leafing through yellowed pages, old maps, and old newspaper articles. Eventually, she found a slim book titled Salem Ghost Stories, which contained a chapter about the supernatural happenings on Hawthorne Boulevard. In that chapter, Mai read a terrifying story about a young woman named Elizabeth who lived in the late 19th century. Elizabeth was said to have died mysteriously in her own house on Hawthorne Boulevard. It was rumored that her spirit still lingered there, wandering the streets at night in search of revenge for her unjust death. This story made Mai shiver, and she began to suspect that the ghost she and others had seen might be Elizabeth's spirit. To learn more about Elizabeth's story, Mai went to a famous antique store in town, where she hoped to meet people knowledgeable about local history. There, she talked to an old man named Mr. Harrison, who had lived in Salem for more than 70 years. Mai told him about her experiences and asked him about Elizabeth's story. Mr. Harrison nodded, saying that Elizabeth's story had become a terrifying legend in Salem for decades. They say she was brutally murdered, and her soul couldn't move on because she still held a grudge. Mr. Harrison said in a sad voice. A few nights later, Mai had to work late again. This time, she felt more nervous than ever as she walked up Hawthorne Boulevard. As she approached the familiar stretch of road where she had first seen the ghost, a sudden cold wind blew, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. Mai felt someone watching her. She timidly raised her eyes and saw the silhouette of a woman in white standing under a street lamp. This time clearer, the woman's face was pale, her deep eyes staring at Mai with a look of utter anguish. Mai stood still, unable to speak. The ghost slowly raised its hand, its thin finger pointing towards an ancient, dark house deep in the dense garden. Then, the ghost let out a mournful sigh and slowly disappeared into the darkness. Mai felt a strange urge to find out about the house the ghost had just pointed to. She felt that perhaps the secret of Elizabeth's death and the reason her soul still lingered here lay in that very house. The next day, Mai went to the address of the ancient house the ghost had pointed to. It was an old, two-story house, painted ash gray, looking deserted and scary. The rotten wooden boards, broken windows, and overgrown garden with weeds added to the creepy atmosphere of the house. Mai felt a chill coming from the house, as if it was hiding a dark and painful secret. She decided to learn about the history of this house, believing that it could be the key to solving the terrifying mysteries of Hawthorne Boulevard. Mai stood across the street, silently observing the old house. The pale moonlight shone on the gray walls. The dark windows were like deep eye sockets, and the mossy tiled roof was covered with dry leaves. The front garden was overgrown with weeds. The bare branches stretched out like ghostly arms. The cold and creepy feeling from the house made Mai shiver, but her curiosity and sympathy for Elizabeth's soul urged her to step forward. Mai decided to approach a nearby house, where an old woman was watering the plants in the garden. She gently asked, "Hello, I'm sorry to bother you. I want to ask you something about that old house. Do you know anything about it?" The old woman looked up at Mai. Her eyes narrowed. "That house? It's been abandoned for many years. I heard that a young girl named Elizabeth used to live there." "It's a sad story," Mai quickly asked. "What sad story, Grandma? I heard that Elizabeth died there, right?" The old woman sighed, her voice lowered. "That's right. She died so young. People say it was an accident, but some say it was suicide. There are also more frightening rumors, saying that she was murdered." "Well, it's an old story. Why bring it up again? You'd better stay away from that house. It's not good." The old woman's warning made Mai even more curious and determined to find out the truth. After thanking the old lady, Mai returned to stand in front of the old house. She walked around, carefully observing every detail. Some of the wooden planks on the wall had rotted, revealing dark gaps inside. A window on the ground floor seemed to be not tightly closed. A small crack opened. Mai looked inside. only to see pitch black and a strong musty smell coming out. She felt her heart beat faster. A daring thought flashed through her mind. Maybe she should try going inside. After a moment of hesitation, Mai decided to take the risk. She gently pushed the window open, trying not to make any noise. The door creaked slightly, but it was enough for Mai to squeeze inside. The house was dark, dust covered in old objects. The musty smell and rotten wood smelled into Mai's nose, making it difficult for her to breathe. An eerie silence enveloped the house. Only Mai's soft footsteps echoed in the quiet space. She felt as if someone was watching her from the shadows. Mai carefully moved through the large living room, the tattered curtains swaying slightly in the breeze that blew through the broken door. She felt the temperature in the room suddenly drop, an unusually cold feeling that made her skin crawl. Suddenly, she heard a slight noise coming from upstairs, like soft footsteps on a rotten wooden floor. Mai's heart stopped. She stood still, listening to every little sound in this creepy house. Mai decided to go upstairs to find out what was going on. The old wooden stairs creaked under her feet. When she reached the second floor, she saw a long, dark hallway, with closed doors on both sides. She gently opened one door and stepped inside. It was an old bedroom, the furniture still in disarray, as if its owner had just left not long ago. On the dusty dressing table, Mai saw an old diary with a worn cover. With trembling hands, Mai picked up the diary and gently opened it. The pages were yellowed. The handwriting was faint but still legible. She began to read the diary, and the more she read, the more terrified she felt. Elizabeth wrote about the fears, the dark secrets, and the terrifying threats she had endured before her death. In the last pages, Elizabeth's handwriting became shaky and desperate. She wrote about a man named John, and the cruel acts he had done to her. The last diary entry was just one sentence: "He won't leave me alone." A horrifying truth flashed through Mai's mind. Elizabeth did not commit suicide or have an accident. She was murdered, and the murderer was probably still hiding somewhere. Mai sat down on the dusty floor, Elizabeth's diary still open in her hands. The trembling words on the last page haunted her mind. John, the one who had caused Elizabeth's horrible death. A feeling of fear and anger welled up inside Mai. She couldn't let this go. She needed to find out who John was and bring him to justice, so that Elizabeth's soul could rest in peace. "I have to do something," Mai whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The next morning, Mai took the diary to Mr. Harrison's antique shop. She told him about what she had found in the old house and showed him Elizabeth's diary entries. Mr. Harrison read each page carefully, his eyes narrowing as if trying to remember something. When he reached the last page, he let out a soft sigh. "John, that name sounds familiar. I think I've heard someone mention it before." Mr. Harrison pondered for a moment and then said, "Let me think. Elizabeth, John. Oh, right. John was the son of a wealthy family who lived near Elizabeth's house back then. Rumor has it that the two of them had feelings for each other. But John's family disapproved because Elizabeth was not a good match." Mr. Harrison paused for a moment and then continued in a meaningful tone. "But there are also people who say that John was a hot-tempered and jealous person. After Elizabeth died, people did not see John again in Salem." Mr. Harrison's story opened up a new direction for Mai. She decided to look for information about John online and in Old Town records. She went to the library and searched the old newspaper section for information about Elizabeth and people named John who lived in Salem in the late 19th century. After some searching, Mai found an old newspaper article about Elizabeth's death, which mentioned that the police had questioned an old boyfriend named John. But there was not enough evidence to charge him. Mai felt a strong urge to find John, whether he was still alive or not. She asked the older people in town if they remembered John's family. She finally found an old woman who had been a neighbor of John's family. The old woman said that after Elizabeth's death, John left Salem and no one knew where he went. However, the old woman remembered that John had a grandson who was still living in this town. Mai went to the address the old woman gave and met John's grandson. He was an old man with a haggard face. When Mai asked about John and Elizabeth, he was surprised and a little annoyed. That happened so long ago. I don't want to talk about it anymore, he said coldly. But Mai did not give up. She told him about what she had experienced and about Elizabeth's diary. After hearing Mai's story, John's nephew changed his attitude. He admitted that John had loved Elizabeth very much, but his jealous and possessive personality made him act blindly. He said that John was very sad after Elizabeth's death, and had lived in torment for many years. Finally, he revealed a terrible secret. John confessed to him that he was the one who killed Elizabeth in a fit of jealousy. He had faked the scene to look like an accident, with the undeniable evidence from the diary, and John's confession to his nephew. Mai went to the police to report it. Elizabeth's case was finally reopened after more than a century. Although John was dead, the truth about Elizabeth's death was revealed. That night, as Mai walked down Hawthorne Boulevard, she no longer felt the fear of the old house. Elizabeth's ghost was gone. Mai felt a strange peace, as if Elizabeth's spirit had finally been set free and forgiven. Mai knew that sometimes, the echoes of the past still need to be heard, and that the truth, no matter how painful, always brings ultimate relief.